Hi, I'm Pierre, and this is the making of TOWNFOLKS, a short town building RPG I made for the Miz Jam 2020. The theme of the jam was this art pack, and when I first looked at it, I was surprised how packed it was. It had a lot of stuff. I really wanted to use as much of it as possible, so I knew I had to make a game with a lot of content. I then came up with the main gameplay loop. Basically, you would go and fight monsters, earn gold when you succeeded, use this gold to build shops in your hometown, use these shops to craft better gear for your fighters, which could go and battle stronger foes, get more gold, upgrade your shops, get better gear, and circle the loop all over again. Pretty satisfied with this idea, I then had to find a good color palette for the game, and settled on this one. I then created a palette in Unity and started to work on my scene. I soon found out that my sprites were blurry, or had these weird rounded corners. After a bit of searching, I found out that the default Unity import settings weren't perfect for pixel art, but this could be fixed by switching a single parameter in the sprite import settings. With that sorted out, I decided I would start working on the city building aspect of the game. I began by creating a scenery for the town. This was basically a bunch of copy-pasting. Next thing on the list was to code some basic camera controls, so I did so. I knew my game would need quite a lot of UI, so I created the menu where you would find the shops you could build and the gear you could craft. I later switched to a more dark UI scheme, as the light one wasn't legible enough. I then created another UI to display more precise information about the action the player wanted to make, like the price of a building or what an item would do. And if you started making a drinking game for every time I say UI, you shouldn't do it. Trust me. Well, now that I had a lot of the basic UI and objects, it was time to code the different aspects of the building gameplay. I spent a couple hours coding some gameplay and resource managers, and improving on the basic scripts I had already made. At this point, I was 4 hours into the jam, and I had a basic building UI working. I could click on buildings and see what they could do. Next step was to make them actually do stuff. To do this, I needed to work a bit more on my resource manager, as I wanted TOWNFOLKS in my town. They would be the basic resource that would work and fight for the player. I had a bit of fun working on the random name generator. Once this and a bunch more coding done, I could build new shops and send TOWNFOLKS to work. The next step was to make yet another UI to indicate what a shop was working on. I also needed a way to progress, so I created a menu where the player could sleep or go on an adventure. Now that I had a lot of systems in place for the building part of the game, I started making the different buildings the player could buy, which in the game logic are just a bunch of scriptable objects. I realized that I had made a cool random name generator, but the player didn't have any way to see them. So I quickly created a population UI, where you could see TOWNFOLKS and their current state, idle, busy or hurt. I then implemented a way to recruit new TOWNFOLKS, which was pretty simple now that most of the UI was already built. I was now roughly 12 hours into the jam and was pretty satisfied with my building gameplay, so I decided to go to sleep and work on the adventure part the next day. But not before I added a little animation when a building upgrades. On Sunday I started by making the world map using a simple 3D mesh I made in Blender, and I added a little animation when you discover a new level. I then created another UI to add some flavor text. After lunch, I work on the battle gameplay, making a basic party member and monster object, then added a UI to configure your party before going on an adventure. I also started working on the battle UI, with the different powers and target indicators. The fighters were looking kind of bland, so I added a simple idle animation and death animation. Since I was doing animations, I wrote some basic scriptable objects that would allow me to play animations for every type of attack. To end the battle, I added a win UI where you could return to your town or continue fighting. Now with a basic combat system working,
I spent some time creating the different monsters, and then the different group of monsters that would constitute my battles. I also added boss battles, which would unlock the next level once defeated. To add some juice and feedback during combat, I added a damage and miss indicator. I also added some indicators to inform that a building had some options available. Next step on the juiced list was audio. I used bfxr to make some retro sound effects and spent the rest of the day making the game musics. I needed at least 3 music tracks for the town, world map and battle. I had the idea of making a single track, then modify it using some clever instrument choices and music theory tricks. I can then blend between the tracks during the game to change the ambience while keeping the melody and beat intact. As you probably noticed if you have some music theory basics, the battle guitar melody follows a minor scale, while the town melody follows a major scale. I now had a pretty cool game, but was lacking the outer shell, more specifically a menu, story and tutorial. The menu was pretty simple. I had spent most of my time doing UI for the game, so I already did most of the objects I needed. I just animated a bit the letters so the menu would feel alive and call it a day. I spent my Wednesday evening working on the story at the beginning, where the player would enter his name as the first townfolk, and made a little animation to juice up the dialogue a bit. The next day, I polished a bit the combat UI, adding some turn cursors for the enemies, scaling up the damage text, and then worked on the tutorial, which was pretty big due to the amount of content and mechanics in the game. Friday, for the end of development, I created 2 endgame animations, one if you lose, and one if you win. On Saturday morning, I had a fully functioning game, a little more than 7 hours left on my clock, so I decided to make a build and submit it, knowing that I still had time to listen to feedback and tweak things. Then, on Sunday, having released 2 minor patches, I was feeling proud of my game and decided to work on the video you're watching right now. The game is out now on itch.io, link in the description. Thanks for watching and I hope you'll enjoy the game.